all of you for being here today instead of sleeping and hanging out with me for a little bit. It's really surreal to be speaking here at the Speed. I never thought I would be speaking at the Speed. So again, thank you to Creative Mornings for this wonderful opportunity. I've always been intrigued by the things that I do not know. And today I'm here to talk to you about something we all know, and that is that death is inevitable. However, while we cannot control the inevitability of death, we can control what we leave behind. So as I'm talking, I'm going to kind of go through two projects. My largest, most ongoing project is my body of work Between Home and Here, which I started in 2014. It's an examination of my relationship with my family, but not just biological family, assumed family as well. One of the greatest challenges that I've faced as a creative is the question of why should anyone look at this work and what does it mean to anybody else aside from me? And so I suppose one of the reasons why I'm here today is to talk to you about how to make a meaningful image. And this was something that I always found myself really perplexed by, especially, with the idea of making art and why is it important and why be a creative. So I'm talking to you guys today from the perspective of a photographer, but a lot of what I'm saying doesn't apply to just being a photographer and working through the photographic medium as a way of expressing yourself. I don't have an exact formula for making a perfect photograph. I don't think I've even made a perfect photograph before. And I'm not really sure I can tell you exactly what constitutes a perfect image. But what I can tell you is that for me, in my experience, the best work I've made is honest work. And the best portraits I've made come from a place of love. And I think sometimes, especially as creatives, in a very image-driven society, especially with social media, we're oversaturated with images. And so we get caught up a lot in trends and following trends. And it's not necessarily that trends are bad, but when I think about what'll happen when I'm not here and what I'll leave behind, it's my images, it's my work. And if I follow trends, I don't know what that says about me when I'm not here anymore. And so for me, while it's simple to say it up here on stage, it's taken me a long time to realize that the work that's meant the most to me is honest work. The work that has been the most important work that I've made has been about my family. It comes from what I know. And I've found that in being a creative and specifically being a photographer, that following what I know and being honest with myself has been a lot more gratifying in terms of making the work that I make. So I'm showing you pictures of my family today, and sure, they're not your family, but that's something we all have in common because we all have family. Whether it's assumed or biological, family is something that's important as well as love. What I can tell you is that while all of us in this room are very different, we feel a lot of the same things. And one of those things that we share is the inevitability of death. So what does photography or even art have to do with death? For me, photography has everything to do with death. It allows me to freeze time. It allows me to take an intangible idea like love, guilt, sadness, grief, and I turn it into a tangible object. So when I first started making work about my family and my loved ones, it was a way for me to freeze time and distance. And for me, death of a memory is the past. And photography really allowed for me to kind of hold on to something and carry it with me. So when I first started making this work about my family, I started making work about my brother and my sister. My sister is right here in the front, thank you. I was living in Dallas, and when I moved to Dallas, Texas from Kentucky, I felt like I lost a part of my identity. And I didn't know where my voice had gone as an artist. And so all of the work I've always made has been deeply personal, and it's been affected by my personal, my experience. And one of the challenges as a creative is, how do I take my personal experience and make it something that's universal? And I think, honestly, in a lot of ways, it's being honest. So I went to, going to grad school was a wonderful experience, and I learned a lot. I also learned a lot about art speak. And one of the things I learned, it only took me, I think, like $80,000 worth of debt to learn this. But when somebody comes to talk to me about what my art is about, they don't want to have to open up a dictionary to understand what I'm talking about. And at the end of the day, 7 years of higher education later, 2 degrees, my work is about love, and my work is about my life. And my work isn't about trying to be something that I'm not. And through photography, I've been able to express myself in a way that I couldn't quite put into words. So it drives me to think about the intangible and to create a physical object out of the intangible. So I've been making work about my family a lot for the past 4 or 5 years. I've also been working through other projects, but everything I make always goes back to family. And when I talk about family, it's not just my immediate family. It's my assumed family as well. The people that I couldn't go anywhere without. And while it's really simple to talk about that, it's allowed me to make really impactful work. And in being honest and being true to myself and making work based off my experiences, it's actually allowed for a lot more opportunities for me to relate and talk to other people. I've found that in being an artist, especially being an artist that deals with issues in terms of relationships, family, identity, that the more honest I am about my work, sure, the simpler it sounds, but the more accessible it makes me to other people. And in making this work, I've actually watched my family grow. I've learned to talk to others. I've learned to build community and ties with others. And I think one of the greatest things about being an artist is being able to create a universal language for anybody, even if it's somebody that you don't know. And so in a lot of ways, I think photography, it really does, it cheats death in a way that it freezes time. And it freezes a moment. And so a lot of my work that I make is very emotional, and it always kind of alludes to death. And I never did that on purpose. I think it's just subconsciously. I guess I'm a little dark. Maybe that's why I got invited to speak here today. But I've always been intrigued by this idea of death, because with death, there's also healing. And for me, being an artist and making work has been a method for helping me cope with all different types of events in my life. And when I make art, it's kind of like second nature. Like, it's not so much that I don't even identify really as being an artist. I'm an artist because that's me. And it's almost like I'm programmed to do that. And sometimes when I'm making work, I don't always know why I'm making it. But I do know that the worst thing you can do as an artist is not make work. And one of the things I've learned a lot, especially as a teacher now, is helping and guiding students in terms of that creative block of well, why should I make this work? Or what's the reason behind making that work? And I actually am really kind of against that. I don't think that there's ever a reason not to make work. And I think it's perfectly okay to make work and not know why you're making it. And that's something that's been really liberating for me. And when I talk about meaningful images or meaningful work, it's work that's honest. It doesn't follow a trend, but our emotions don't follow trends either. When we're not here anymore, all that's left is what we leave behind. We won't be remembered by our likes on Instagram or how many followers we have. We won't be remembered by that perfect plant on pastel sweet photograph we took. Those aren't the things that make up who we are. And so as an artist, it is easy, I think, to fall into trends and to feel maybe inadequate if you're comparing yourself to others. But I have found that when I've been honest with myself, that has allowed me to flourish the most as an artist. And so I think following trends very much contributes to being in a creative rut. And it's easy to be in a creative rut and not know that you're in it. And a creative rut is when you're making work, but it's not true to yourself. So the wheels are spinning, but the car's not moving. And I have found that to get myself out of a rut, I don't always know why I'm making the work that I make. But I do find that later on in time, a lot of it becomes a lot more significant, sometimes in really weird ways. And so lately, photography has allowed me to speak with the dead. I make a lot of work about flowers. I'm going to tell a quick story, but I recently inherited 10 boxes from my father's house. Most of those boxes were in storage from childhood memorabilia, baby clothes, baby blankets, old toys. And I found in the bottom of the box a rose that was wrapped in wax paper. And it was really striking to me because for the past 2 years, I've been collecting bags of dead flowers. So if you go into my house, there's several hundred bags and jars of dead plants and flowers. And all of those bags and jars are labeled with the date or the event of what happened. And kind of like a photograph, that bag allows me to hold on to the memory of the past. And so while we're talking about death, and while we're talking about making meaningful images, I feel like, in a way, one of the most cliche images you can make is of a flower. And I photograph flowers all of the time. So how are flower photographs meaningful, and what do they have to do with death? Well, for me, they have everything to do with death. So I found this old flower in a piece of wax paper. It turns out that flower was, at least it's almost 30 years old. And it was a flower that my father took off of his grandfather's casket at his funeral. And so my whole life, I've always kind of been drawn to floral imagery. I've been drawn to death. I've been drawn to this drive to archive and preserve. And I've never known why. And now, as I talk to you guys today, I think about the things we left behind. And I don't know what my dad was thinking when he did that, but I think in a way he was thinking about me. And so thinking about death, I worked on a new book recently, which I have copies of in my car, if you want to grab a copy after this. And in thinking about death, and in thinking about family, and in thinking about my family before I was around, or when I was a child, and memory, also inspired by my sister who's pregnant. And so thinking about the continuation of my family and where my work will go. Sorry, the baby's a photo op. But I've looked into my past, and I've looked into the dead, and I've looked into how they contribute to my identity. And so I found this photograph of my grandmother. She died when I was about 5 or 6. I don't remember. And she died of leukemia. And I thought, how do I make an image about leukemia? How do I make an image about death? How do I make an image about a person I don't remember, but whose death impacted my mother so profoundly? And so I found this frame of empty images, and I thought, maybe I'll photograph the empty images. At the time, I was also drying flowers. I was pressing them in cardboard, and I forgot that I was pressing flowers. And a month later, I went to grab this frame to photograph it, and the humidity from my house had spread mold over the frame from the flowers I had been pressing in my studio. And I thought, how perfect. What a perfect image about death. And it wasn't one that I thought of. It was one that just came to me in time. But still, again, this idea of death and growth and healing, even mold with its healing properties. And here I am making an image of it about death. And so I think it's important, when making work, to make work about what's close to you. Sometimes the most interesting things about us are the things that are right under our nose. You don't have to search far beyond what you know to make impactful images or to find creativity. I have found that Maybe my family is just pretty interesting. But I have found in staying close to what I know and being honest with who I am, that has allowed me to make the images that I make. And it doesn't always come from following trends, and sometimes there's happy accidents. And sometimes things are just really well planned out and time is on my side. But what I have done and what I have learned about making good images is that I've made a shit ton of bad images. But if I didn't make that bad work, I wouldn't know what good work was. And so it's really important, again, like looking at trends and the things that set us back from making work, it's important to make bad work. I encourage all of you to make bad work. If you go into every artistic endeavor you're going to do with the mindset that this is gonna suck, it feels a lot better when it actually doesn't end up sucking. There's a lot less pressure. So another thing, talking about flowers, right? So I've always been drawn to flower imagery. My dad always planted flowers as a kid. He assigned flowers to us. I was a Gerber daisy, and my sister was a tulip. My dad planted a red rose bush when my brother was born. When I was looking through these boxes, I found another box of drawings I didn't recognize. And they were drawings that my dad had made in the 60s when he was a kid that my grandmother had held on to. And I found that, again, I wasn't always communicating with the dead, but I was communicating with people from the past, with my dad as a child before I was ever in his life. And suddenly, in this adventure into looking at something that existed before I was born, it foreshadowed so much of who I am today. So this is an illustration my dad made of daffodils. And then on the right is a portrait of him from elementary school that my grandmother had held on to. And I thought, why would she hold on to this? What is the significance of holding on to things? Why do we take photographs? Why do we have family albums? Why do we make images? And I challenge you today to think about making images because of who it'll affect when you might not be here anymore. In that box, I also found a photo of myself when I was a kid, as well as old clothes, family photos with dates, a baptism gown. And I started thinking, when I was looking at plant imagery and images from my past, how much of who my father and my other family members in my life before I was born foreshadowed so much of who I am today. And that's really intriguing as an artist. And I've paralleled a lot of those ideas and thoughts with plant imagery, with my own narratives about roots and identity, but always sticking close to what I know, and what I know is me, and what I know is my family. And one of the most gratifying things about being an artist for me is being able to make work that's personal and share it with you today. And when you look at these images, you have a completely different understanding of them. And that's something that brings us together. Part of being an artist is building community. It's about sharing your experience, because everyone in this room has a different experience and a different perspective. And if we weren't honest and true to ourselves and what we know, then all of the work that we share and leave behind won't be diverse. So I've been playing a lot with this imagery. I've been thinking a lot about me as a child and before I was even born, and how it's foreshadowed who I am, and how I've been able to discover these things, these gifts, through examining myself when I make my work, and not examining others and trying to fit another person's narrative into mine. Some are more vague, others are very personal. This is a spread from my book. My dad had drawing exercises, and he drew bunny, or he wrote bunny, and the teacher wrote where. And in another box, I found an illustration that I had drawn saying that I wished for a big brown rabbit. And so here we are again communicating, and we don't even exist at the same time. And again, in making honest imagery, I've made imagery based off what I know, what I remember, and what I care to hold on to. So I make work about flowers. And the reason why I make work about flowers is because of the significance behind a flower. The way we use flowers to commemorate rites of passage, birthdays, anniversaries, forgiveness, weddings, and even death, how we use flowers to mask death. I even think about my relationship with Louisville and many of my close friends who I've lost to heroin, another flower. I think about the rose bush that my dad planted for my brother. And I think about how sometimes the most cliche image, a simple flower, isn't a cliche if it has a personal meaning to you. And so when I talk about making meaningful images, there's no perfect formula for making work that matters. The best work you can make is honest. It comes from love. And so today, all I can share is my experience and what I've learned in being an artist. And if there's anything that I can leave you with today, it is the importance of honesty and looking back on love, but also looking back on your legacy and the things you leave behind. And so while death is something that's often difficult to think about, we can cheat it. We can cheat it through making art, because when we're not here, our art will be. Thank you.